One of my new lines for when somebody automatically starts judging me based on the fact that I was homeschooled or really anything to do with my background whatsoever is to tell them that I can call up one of my parents and have them chat on the phone and tell my parents about how bad they were instead of telling it to me. So I started a new job recently, and something that I found very interesting that keeps coming up again and again as I meet new people is that one particular coworker of mine seems to be very challenged by the way that I approach stuff and almost intimidated by me to the point that she thinks she needs to bully me to prove that she's worthy. Which is odd to me because the way that I was brought up, I will say one good thing was that I was raised with a strong work ethic and confidence, at least in my ability to get things done quickly. Before we get into today's content, I just want to acknowledge that yes, I do look tired. What are those bags under my eyes? For anybody who might be coming at me in the comments eventually. Yes, these are from something called lack of sleep, which, whether you're male or female, if you were looking at a male-appearing person and you saw that, you wouldn't be making this comment. And it's probably because you're used to seeing all of the females around you with a lot of makeup on. And I don't do that. So yes, I've had crappy sleep recently, but I'm good. On to the video. But a downside to having that strong work ethic and efficiency that I had never really thought about until I started interacting with more people is that you can come across as trying to be an overachiever, even if you're just being efficient. And other people can take offense to that because they're so accustomed to maybe not putting in as much effort, and maybe they don't want to. And instead of telling you that, they're going to do a very roundabout way of trying to make you uncomfortable because they don't like it. But they just won't come out and tell you, which is crazy to me. Like, why not just tell me work less if you're not happy about that? But no, they won't do that. So this girl from basically day one started probing me and asking questions, and she was clearly trying to figure out my age and personal info without asking me directly. And a big way that she did that was by asking where I went to high school. And I usually do try to avoid that by just saying, oh, I went to college at XYZ and got my degrees there, and then I completely avoid the point. But in this case, I'm trying to be more open about my background because I've realized that you can find out more of the truth of someone and how they're going to interact with you going forward if you actually expose some of your maybe weak, vulnerable areas. And for me, one of those would be homeschooling. So I went ahead and very openly acknowledged the fact that I did not actually go to high school, and I had been homeschooled, which was more of an unschooling experience. And this girl's response was basically dead silence, followed by a bunch of awkwardness and not following up at all with any sort of question. And from that point on, to this day, she still has been treating me a little bit coldly and like she would want to know more, but for some reason she just doesn't feel like she's comfortable asking me, or she has already put me into a box, which is fine, but that's not who I am, and that kind of annoys me. So one thing in particular that was a bit surprising to me with the way that this coworker responded to stuff in the first couple days when I was getting trained was she was asking me like typical questions about my background and whatnot, but then I did start to give more info about how my parents were very strict and were not supportive of my interest in the future, and how I ended up having to move out at 17 and then thanks to sibling support, I was able to do that, but then started paying for all of my expenses, including my own rent, at age 19, and have been doing that ever since. And while I guess this could be seen as her trying to relate to me, the way that she responded talking about her parents being very toxic in their own way, and how she wishes that she could move out, but like it's too much money, despite the fact that she actually has regularly made more than I ever have, which just shows perspective and the difference there. But it really seemed like she was trying to measure up, and it was very weird because I was like, we're not trying to compete about whose parents are more toxic here. And for professional reasons, when she said that, I didn't come right out and be like, why are we comparing our parents like this? But it was a little weird to me, and I guess that hasn't really happened to me very much with somebody trying to measure up regarding how toxic their parents are. I feel like, if anything, most other people have talked about how great their parents are to them, and I'm happy for them for that. So this was a new one for me. I just am so curious about how other people respond to situations like this, or how you would reply to someone like this coworker of mine. Because it's not something that I have experienced in the past, and I have a feeling it's not going to be the last person who I interact with like this. So it would be helpful to get some tips if other people have different perspectives. It's also worth mentioning, and I think fairly significant, that this particular coworker has already been in a relationship with someone who she plans to marry since her early 20s, maybe, possibly even before that. And they're already planning the names of their children. And I've been nothing short of encouraging when she brings it up. But I also do think back to 10 years ago, even less, when I was still in that mindset. And at that point, I had a naivety where I thought that was what I wanted. And it took a lot of growth to realize that it actually was not. So I think for me, it ended up being a blessing in disguise that none of that came to fruition, because now I've discovered more about myself and realized that I probably will not have a biological family for multiple reasons because of how I was raised, despite being told from a young age that I was supposed to. And I think I can respect the fact that she's finding happiness in that, but it also shows that maybe she feels trapped to some degree, and she just has not processed it enough to realize that's potentially an issue for her. Something else that I think plays a key role into the fact that I have not left this job due to my interactions with this coworker is that thankfully I am not scheduled in a way that overlaps with her very much. And so that definitely makes it a lot easier. But I still acknowledge the fact that that's a bit of a privilege, because I have had previous jobs where I couldn't choose that and had to be around the other person, and things got toxic really quickly. One of my new lines for when somebody automatically starts judging me based on the fact that I was homeschooled or really anything to do with my background whatsoever is to tell them that I can call up one of my parents and have them chat on the phone and tell my parents about how bad they were, instead of telling it to me, because my parents are the ones to blame. Obviously, that's not going to be the correct answer in most situations, but it is something fun to consider to just get people off guard a bit, because I think most people aren't even processing the fact that they're actually judging me based on stuff that I had no control over. And they really need to be passing that judgment on to my parents instead. One way that I have tried to manage situations like this in the past, and I think it can be very helpful for deflecting what somebody else says to you back onto them a bit, is to think about how they're potentially feeling threatened by the fact that I potentially don't care, or I at least appear to not be the jealous type or prioritize what they think they should be doing. And a lot of that comes down to what society in general is telling people to do in situations like this, or how they should act, or whatever. And I think because of my background being so different, I was not raised with that, and I wasn't in situations where my peers would pressure me into doing things, and I had the freedom to form my own opinion and acknowledge that it's okay to not think the same way as everyone else. And in some ways, it's actually better not to. And well, this approach definitely seems to make the other person even more uncomfortable to some degree. I think I would rather know that I'm at least reflecting my truth and being as authentic as possible, because my other choice is to basically act like who I think they want me to be, which is not authentic, and it requires me masking and giving in to some bullying techniques that the other person will tend to use towards me, and that is not something that I want either. That's actually way worse. At the same time, though, I do have to remember and remind myself that a lot of these interactions really show and reflect far more about the other person than they do about me. And it really helps to filter through people quickly to help me figure out who's going to actually stick around and maybe be willing to learn more about my past, which I had no choice over, versus the ones who are going to just automatically put me into a box and judge me based on things like the fact that I was homeschooled, which I did not choose, and my parents chose that for me. So yeah, there's that. If anyone has recommendations or advice on better ways to approach situations like this, I am definitely all ears, and open to hearing new perspectives, because I do like to keep my mind open and consider where the other person is coming from, but I also need to be keeping healthy boundaries and not permitting other people to just walk all over me, which I find has repeatedly been the assumption from other people once I start telling them about my background.